This is But Tell Me How, the business podcast that goes under the surface. It's a conversation about the ups, the downs, the detail, and the reality of how to run a business, held at the Institute of Directors. Joining us today is Sir Terry Leahy, former CEO of Tesco. During Sir Terry's over 10 years in charge, Tesco became the UK's largest retailer and one of the largest in the world.
I think entrepreneurship is vital to the future success of the UK.
Now, I should say I know Sir Terry very well. We worked together closely when I set up Tesco.com and when I was part of his exec team.
If you look at the rate of growth of regulations, it outstripped the rate of growth of the economy. And we've probably got that balance wrong.
Sir Terry joins us on But Tell Me How. Today we're welcoming Terry Leahy, who has got a long and glittering career, and we are going to talk about the early stage of running Tesco, but we're also going to talk about many of the things which he's done since leaving Tesco and starting out, and probably what a more entrepreneurial part of his career. So I think obviously lots of people will know of you, etc. But what would be great if you could tell a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you got started in business, and that bit of the journey.
Yeah, of course. Well, I was born in Liverpool, and I still have strong ties up there. My parents were Irish, first generation. My mum was a nurse. My father had trained as a ship's carpenter, but been injured in the war, invalided, and was a greyhound trainer and itinerant gambler on occasions.
Right.
And we grew up in a prefab on a council estate. And but I was lucky enough to pass a scholarship to the Catholic grammar school in Liverpool, and really that was my way up and out, because they gave me a very good education there, and I was able to go on to university where I studied management.
Right. And so when you left, I mean, going to university must have been a big thing. First person in your family to go to university. So then how did you decide to do what next? I mean, what was the thought process?
Pretty accidental. I mean, there was no background in business in my family. And I just looked at a variety of universities, chose Manchester, and chose management, business. I'd done economics at A-level, found that quite interesting, and so I was able to follow on there. It was actually a very good faculty at Manchester, one of the best in the country. They had professors for each discipline, very well resourced. Economics, psychology, marketing, all this sort of thing. And so once I was in there, I was always going to have a career in business in some form.
And then you chose to go into retail. I mean, I think the co-op to start with, is that right?
Yeah, again, an accident. The co-op was based in Manchester, a cooperative wholesale society. And so they were the big employer. And so I took a role with them. Actually, a very good training at the time. And I sold delicatessen product all around the 240 independent societies that there were in the UK at that time. And that's a good training, selling delicatessen in places like Wigan and Swindon and so on.
Yeah, especially as a young man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you moved down south, I understand, to Tesco. Was there any particular driver of coming down to Tesco, or was there?
No, not really. My girlfriend at the time was moving south, so I took that as an opportunity to look south. It was already clear that Tesco was doing something. It was a little more aggressive than the co-op, making more progress. So it was a natural next step.
So just talk us very briefly through your sort of rise at Tesco. So how did that happen? How did you make your way as a successful manager and then chief executive of the business?
Really, I was the first employee within the marketing department. There wasn't a marketing department before. Actually, we started, there was one computer in Tesco at the time. It occupied an entire floor of the building. Didn't do much that was useful. but it had begun to collect a bit of data on item movement. This was before barcodes.
Wow, yeah.
So this was more about shipments of goods. But
So what, shipments into the store?
shipments into the store, and then you could infer what the sales might be and so on. No information around customers or anything like that. And so I started actually analyzing that data in a room without any windows, and tried to make some sense of it. And from that, we started to develop rudimentary ranging for different stores and so on, started to centralize some of the decision making based on that. It was actually the very, very dawn of category management, although
Yeah.
it wasn't called that at the time.
Mm. And so how did that then lead you up into the organization? What caused you to be successful in that business?
Well, I grew the marketing effort, I suppose, at a time that the business was modernizing. It was building the first superstores on the edge of town rather than the high street stores. And that gradually developed that category management role. And then I went across to buying and ended up running a large part of the buying function, fresh food actually, which was a good experience. And then I joined the PLC board of the company back as the marketing director at a difficult time for the company.
So this would have been what, late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, early 90s.
Right. Yeah. So just to probably just to help everybody in terms of timing and things, when did you start at Tesco?
Started in 79.
Wow.
Yeah. So in 92, I was asked to join the board as the first marketing director. The reason being that the business had struggled in the recent recession, made a few missteps,
Mm.
lost a bit of confidence. And I was asked to go and find out what the problem was and how we could address it. Because of my background, I fell back on data. We had lots of EPOS data by that time. But I also actually asked customers and staff what the problem was. And I think that was, in a way, the beginning of becoming a really truly customer-focused organization where you really brought the voice of the customer into the business.
And was that the first time that had been done in the business?
In
In
a
a serious
really
way?
serious way, yeah.
Mm.
Of course, anyone who grows up in retail, they meet customers the whole time, talk to staff the whole time. They intuitively know about these things, but in a really organized way.
Yeah.
Uh,
So this
and
was systematic, quantitative, etc. Yeah.
yeah, and pretty painful too, because they were telling us some harsh truths about the business, and you have to reset. It's very interesting, actually, how beliefs can become entrenched in an organization about itself, about what it's good at, what it's not good at, how it sits relative to competitors, what's important for customers. You would think that an organization would always keep in touch with its customer. But over time, a gap begins to emerge, and beliefs that have grown up in the business people hold on to, where customers change and their interests change and their lives change and what's important to them change, and they change quicker than the organization. And then so you can get this, what can become a fatal gap between where the customer is and where you are as an organization. And you see this repeat itself in organizations, public and private,
Absolutely.
time and time again.
Mm.
So bringing the customer in and really letting them tell you what their lives are about, what's important to them, what they really think of you, what you do well, what you're not doing so well, is vital, because that is the starting point. You've got a truthful assessment of where you are. And once you know where you are,
Then you could do
you
something
can
about
do
it.
something about it.
So tell me, then moving on, so that work was successful. You're still the marketing director. I suppose around the mid-90s, this idea of Clubcard came along, which was sort of another version of that. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that came to you and why you decided to do Clubcard?
Well, it wasn't a new idea because, of course, the co-op really was created as a club. And that's where I'd started my career. And the idea of the club membership and a dividend and so on was 100 years old. But of course, it was all analog. It was paper and people were writing their, membership in books and so on. And so nobody could really do a modern digital form of that, a database form of that, simply because computers were not powerful enough. And we had to wait until the early mid-90s before computers were powerful enough to hold the data on individual customer shopping.
So Terry, that's really interesting. So that had always been in your mind that this would be something you'd want to do. So you knew way before it was possible that that would be something you'd want to actually put into the business.
Yeah, that was I was fortunate in that regard. And I had this idea planted by the history of the co-op and waited until it was possible to use it in a modern way. And of course, it was transformational for Tesco, and in some ways transformational for the retail industry. And you could actually say it was the beginning of big data and all that means. But for Tesco, we got a huge advantage in the way we built our marketing mix, our offer for customers, because our marketing was able to be tailored to individual customers or individual groups of customers. And of course, what everybody has learned subsequently is the return on investment from targeted marketing, from tailored, is so much greater than from mass marketing and so on. So that was an inbuilt structural advantage we had, and we were able to.
And the customer engagement with Clubcard was phenomenal. I mean, it was extraordinary switch of customers. I think, again, as I said, I joined just after it all happened. And I think you'd had 1 million customers switch in 1 year from competitors to Tesco. So moving along a bit, you've then appointed to chief executive, and I think how did you think about that role and what you needed to do with the company? Had you got a preset plan of things you wanted to do, or how did you think about making that business even more successful?
Well, because of Clubcard and some other sort of innovations around that time, like Tesco Express and other things, online shopping, where we were one of the first in the world to do, and you ran a big part of it, the online shopping. The business had momentum. But the question was, taking over as a CEO, what comes next? And if you think you've climbed to the top of a hill, find another hill. And so that was the thing. And the other hill was international retailing, because the industry it's essentially a local industry, but it was becoming international. So, were you going to be a participant in that, or were you just going to be somebody who was bought by an international player? We had the opportunity to add general merchandise to our food business, and to the opportunity to develop things that are not normally associated with supermarkets, like selling services, telecoms, financial services, and so on. And of course, to continue to build on the insight that all of the Clubcard data gave us. So, pulling all that together, we were able to set an ambition for the business, a vision for the business. And but the key part of that is you've got to involve a lot of people in a discussion around those things. I mean, do they really think that that's the right thing to do? They know the company. Do they really buy into that? And I think that period, which involved actually in one form or another, virtually everybody who worked in the business, was a critical process to go through. Because from day one, you had the buy-in to what I was trying to achieve as a youngest chief executive.
So, but tell me, how did you mobilize? How did you get everybody so bought in? Because it was a phenomenal part of being part of that Tesco team, which was people were bought into the plan. So how did you do that? What was the way you thought about making everybody get behind that plan?
It really happened progressively, starting with my inner team of, you know, probably 10 people, some of whom had been, candidates for the CEO role. So it had been, you were now leading people who in the past maybe had been your boss or were trying to get the CEO job. So getting them all together and really listening to, their contribution and thrashing it out was a key period, and we took our time over that, weeks, not a few hours. And then going out then and embracing the whole of the business, and we did literally have all of our staff join meetings, and we said basically, look, you work in Tesco, Tesco, the customers, the business. What are we good at? What are we not so good at? What do you think we should concentrate on? And out of that really came the core values of the business, and it was those core values then that really became the compass that we navigated by, and was an essential and much easier for people to buy into. Your point, because they felt they understood what the business was about, what was important to the business, and they felt that they could identify with that.
So I'm going to move you on beyond Tesco, because I think everybody knows about the success of the business and your contribution to all of that, and talk about what you chose to do after you left, because many chief executives have had such a long career, very successful, and actually, as you know, being chief executive is pretty exhausting. So, but you chose to then go on and do other business ventures. So just tell me, how did you think about what you were going to do post Tesco?
I didn't give it a huge amount of thought. The life of a CEO in a business like Tesco, with so many people and so many customers and a high profile in the UK, is very intensive and exhausting. And I was completely absorbed by that. Two things I knew: one is I couldn't do it forever. And two is I probably wouldn't want to try and do that again somewhere else. Tesco was the business that I'd grown up in. It was a great privilege to be the CEO for 14 years, as it turned out. And so I wouldn't be able to repeat that somewhere else. So I wanted to stay in business, but in a different way. And uh, two things became emerged for me. One was to invest directly into early stage businesses, mainly e-commerce or software that enabled e-commerce. And I like that because I knew a bit about it, and also I like being around people starting up businesses. I like being around entrepreneurs, and because you were allowed to really deal with the fundamental building blocks of business, entrepreneurship, wealth creation. So that was good fun. But also I was approached by Clayton de Rice, which is highly respected, one of the founders of the private equity industry. I very much like the people, how they go about business, and I joined CD&R as a senior advisor. And that role has increased over time. It's now where I spend most of my time, and I chair businesses for them, and I'm involved in the life of a private equity firm.
Now, you may not remember this, but we were out in stores visiting once, and I think you said to me, you turned to me and you said, I can't think of anything worse than being a chairman of a business. So why did that change? What was the insight which you got, which actually said, no, I will enjoy this?
Yeah, I think it's the recognition that you can't be the chief executive. So what are you going to be? So if the role calls for you to be a chairman, you have to learn that role. I think being a chair of a startup or an early stage business, or being the chair of a business in private capital, is different to being a chair of a public company. And I have been chair of a public company subsequently. And I think you are able to bring more to that role, or in a different things to that role
So
than you
that'd be
can with a
interesting.
public company.
Explain to that. What's the difference? Why can you bring more? What can you do which you can't do in a public company?
Well, if you take a company that's private, that's of a similar scale to a listed public company, because I think early stage businesses are something different. Um, Typically, you have a single or a much more concentrated shareholder group, so it's much easier to get alignment between the management
Mm.
and the shareholders in terms of what you want to achieve. And going right back to the earlier discussions about Tesco, and getting alignment then about what I was going to try and do as the chief executive, you get the same benefits. You're clear from the outset. What is the business there to do? And you can spend more of your time with the management on the things that are really going to create value for the business and make a difference for the business. So I think there's of course you've got to cover the full range of issues that a large company must address, but there's more time for the core business discussions that I like.
Great. Well, thanks for all that background. I just now wanted to ask you a few questions around the insights which you've got over your time in business. I mean, one of the things which is um, you've been interviewed extensively over the years. What's the one thing which people haven't asked you about you and your journey, which you wish more people understood?
Um, I'd mention a couple of things. They're not that specific to me, but they did happen to me, so
Yeah.
I'll use the example. One is the enormous difference any of us can make to a young person on the way through if you take an interest in them and if you build their confidence. Because, I mean, in my case, you can imagine coming from a prefab, you don't think that you're automatically qualified to go and run a company like Tesco.
Mm.
So along the way, there had been one or two people who encouraged me that I could do much more than I thought I could. And in a way, that's the greatest form of leadership, to instill in people a
It's a
belief
great
they can
gift.
go further than they
Mm.
would go on their own. So that, and that's a gift that's available to any of us. We'll always come across people in situations where we can give confidence to and build their self-esteem. The other thing I learned a lot on the journey, which isn't often spoken about, is the enormous difference between knowing and doing. And actually, in a world of data, it's easier than ever to know. Uh, but knowing isn't doing. And there's a real process. You know this, John, better than me, that you have to follow in order to convert knowledge into change, into value creating change. You have to build consensus, don't you? They're not going to go
No.
off and do things they fundamentally disagree with. So you have to bring the data in, say, on the basis of this data, here's the way forward. But then you do need a disciplined environment that says, okay, if I'm in the room and I've agreed with you, then when I go outside, that's what we're all going to do. And often people miss on that discipline. And then, again, you know better than me, there's a whole set of techniques around doing in terms of how you bring together people and processes and systems in
Yeah.
order to make it possible. And then the discipline then to review to make sure, did it happen? And do we have to fine tune it?
So Terry's slightly, I should explain, he's slightly teasing me because the last 4 years I was at Tesco, that's exactly what you got me to do, which was basically to mobilize the organization on our big change programs, which was phenomenally successful. But I think you also created a culture and environment where it was very easy to actually use the standard techniques to get people motivated. It was a great time.
But it is a capability that's so important in organizations, so important in society, actually.
Yeah.
When you see, if you listen to most politicians, they give a pretty good account of what the problem is and what needs to be done. But it's that capability actually then to affect that change.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, as you know. So often as business leaders, we're celebrated as individuals, but tell me about the importance of having the right team around you. How did you find the team? How did you get them working well together?
What I learned, you know, doing business around the world with Tesco and subsequently, there's a universal desire amongst people at work, and it's pretty simple. They want a job that's interesting to do. They want to be treated with simple respect. They want a chance to get on, maybe even not for them, but that their colleagues can get on. And they want a boss who's some help and not the biggest problem in their life. And so that if you can offer that simple contract, then you've got the beginnings of a team. And then if you can put your trust in them, and that's the right way around, you shouldn't ask them to trust you. You've got to put your trust in them. You've got to risk failing because they let you down. And if you do that, then they'll put their trust in you. And then if you can paint a picture of a place that they feel they can get to, then they'll start to follow you. And then you've got all the ingredients of a successful team.
I agree with that. But tell me how you also selected the team, because you actually I always felt like you had great people around you, but certainly at Tesco and from what I've heard in other organizations. How did you find the right people to be in the team, etc.? Because you did select people as well.
Yeah, and I've learned more about that actually since I've left Tesco. And one of the great strengths of the private equity industry is how good they are and how much time they spend finding talent. And so that is the key search, the great search that never ends is looking for talent.
Hmm.
And being prepared to look anywhere for talent, having a sense that, different types of talent bring out the best in each other. But also looking for the talent that's locked in people anyway that's there. If because you can't just buy all the talent you want off the shelf. Sometimes you've got to sort of pull it out of people. And if you can get that mix right, that's how you build a strong team.
Mm. Over the course of your career, I'm sure there have been lots of sources of inspiration. Have there been any mentors which have helped you make your business career work?
Yeah, and I'll name one, David Malpass. He's not that well known in this, but he's a very big part of this
Could you explain
long-term
who David was? Sorry.
success of Tesco. He was managing director. It's a title that isn't used so much nowadays. It might align to a chief operating officer, but it was actually a bit more than that. It was a time before CEOs, when there were executive chairs effectively and then managing directors. And David fulfilled that role before me. And I could only describe him as a sort of George Smiley character. Very self-effacing, very quiet, but a real thinker in an industry that really was used to action rather than thought. It's a bit ready, fire, aim sometimes,
Yeah.
the retail industry, because it's so fast-paced. And he was a real strategic thinker. And he had a real sense of what really mattered and the order in which it mattered. And that combination of knowing those few things that are really going to be important, but also the timing and the sequence around delivering those things. And so, he taught me a lot.
How important was it to actually feed off other people as you were, going through your career? Was it is important to have people around you liked and respected, who you could learn things from?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think. Look, success in a big organization is achieved by thousands of people, is the truth. And it's not too much of a cliche to say you never want a culture of one leader. You want a culture of thousands of leaders, because in any situation, you want that person to step forward and represent the business, and take responsibility, take accountability, and take a risk. And people will only do that. They'll only lead or take a risk if they believe in the values of the business. They feel trusted by the business. They feel they belong to something.
So you're celebrated very much for your success, but tell me about a big failure which happened in your career or in your life. What did you learn from that?
Yeah, I'm always uncomfortable asking this question because, in part, failure and success are the same thing. It's about taking risk to change things. And sometimes it'll succeed and sometimes it'll fail, but it's part of the same process. They go hand in hand. And so it's a misnomer to try to live a life where you avoid failure and only seek success. It's impossible to do.
As somebody once said to me, it shows you're not trying hard enough if you haven't had a failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, to some extent, it misrepresents business. It misrepresents life. They're both inherently full of risk. And if you plot a course to avoid that risk, you're probably condemning yourself to less growth, less innovation, ultimately less success. But you want a specific example. So if I go back to the time when I was running the fresh food department at Tesco at the back end of the 80s, a very successful time for Tesco. We were growing rapidly. The fresh food area was growing rapidly. Own brand was developing, and central supply chains had made just-in-time delivery of fresher and fresher products possible. And honestly, I thought I knew it all. I'd got my way of working organized and my team organized,
And growth was fantastic and the numbers were great.
yeah, and how I went about the day and how I went about the job, it was all a formula. And then almost overnight, it stopped working, and it wasn't working, and the business was really suffering and losing height at a tremendous pace. And it was a very, very uh, disruptive time for the business. And for me personally, the biggest challenge I'd ever faced, because basically I didn't know what to do.
And what had gone wrong when you sort of analyzed the situation?
Well, that was the point at which the business made me the marketing director on the board in order to find out what to do. And I was mortified at getting that job because I had literally no clue what to do.
Really?
Yeah. So I went back to first principles, that I'd learned at university in marketing and in the early years of my job, and asked the customer. Anyway, cut a long story short, of course, what emerged was I'd become certain, because of success, about the environment in which I operated and my team operated. And that environment had changed, and customers had changed. And the thing about customers is they don't tap you on the shoulder and say, "I've changed."
Yeah. Or I'm buying these things now.
Yeah, they just change.
Yeah.
And if you're not really tuned into that, you'll miss it. And of course, the great curse of being successful is you're the last person who's looking for change, because this environment is the most beneficial to you. You're the successful one. And so that's the most dangerous time. So I suppose the big learning from failure for me is about complacency, the old paranoid thing.
Yeah.
And to avoid complacency at all costs. And you often find at the top of successful organizations people who are a bit paranoid, because they've come through that experience and they know that the line between success and failure is so narrow. And it's often harder for the younger people who join a successful organization. I'm thinking about the Magnificent Seven at the
Yeah,
moment.
well, I experienced it at Apple, actually. I'll
Right.
tell you about that. Yeah,
Yeah, you
same
did.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Uh,
the people who've been at Apple for a long time were all knew about the near-death experience, and they were paranoid, and they were all talking about how it could go wrong. At the time, I think it was, what's the most profitable business in the world, and they were going great guns, but they were really paranoid, and they actually spoke about the fact that the people who were joining really didn't understand Apple.
Yeah, and it's difficult for them
Yeah.
because they are so in awe of the success that they see. They think, well, how could you possibly change all of this? And of course, it's that fear of change that may then is the ingredients of a future problem.
Interesting. Really good stuff. So you obviously had an incredibly busy professional career and still are very busy. How did you balance that with your personal life at the same time?
Yeah, I'm not sure you ever do. I'm not sure I ever did.
Because your wife was a full-time doctor as well,
Doctor in
hospital
the
doctor. Yeah.
NHS, yeah,
Yeah.
and we had a young family to bring up. For me, it was just work and family, and then even that balance. There was nothing else, and then even that balance between work and family probably wasn't quite right. It's not something that I would recommend.
Mm.
It's just that's how our life turned out, but we got through it, and it is different now. People think are more thoughtful about getting that balance right, and I suppose the key thing is about being productive. I've got a great friend in the US who's a top spine surgeon, and he's one of the best in the world at what he does. You know, he's on the golf course at 2 o'clock every day, and he's able to do that because he's very organized, very productive. And he's very capable at how he utilizes resources. So it's not just about working hard. It's
Yeah. I don't think I ever got that right either myself, I have to say. So not everything in business is exciting. Can you tell us one boring thing, but important for your success in business? Something which is just people think, oh, that's really nothing of interest at all.
well, for me, it's that key difference between simple and simplistic. And the really key ingredients for business are always deceptively simple. And there's always relatively few things that really matter. But as a result, you've got to focus relentlessly on those few things. And you've got to communicate in that simple way the whole time and never change. And honestly, sometimes that can be a bit boring, but it's essential
Yeah.
that you stay true to that short, simple message about the business, which usually is it's the strategy for the business.
And what about the simplistic side of it? So you said there's the danger between simple and simplistic.
Too many people think that something that's so simple must be simplistic, and they're looking for a more complicated answer to the question that isn't there.
You talk about having that simple thing which you then repeat to everybody. Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, well, if you take Tesco back then, the simple thing was just ask the customer, and the customer will tell you honestly, without any side or any extra grind, what they like about your business and what they don't. If you just listen to the customer or just followed the customer, actually, as their lives change, you change. It's deceptively simple, but that really was the basis of Tesco's success.
So what's next for you in business? What are you thinking about doing now? Because sort of time moves on for all of us, but you're still highly active, very busy. So what's the plan moving forwards?
Well, I hope there is an next for me in business. I'm 68 now, so the main thing is keep healthy, keep curious. I work with a great firm in Clayton W. Rice. I have a family office now that handles the sort of early stage investing, which is still fascinating. That is much more focused on the UK.
And you're still doing that early stage investing.
Yeah.
You're still enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's essential that the UK sees itself as a place for innovation and growth and entrepreneurship. It's absolutely key to our wealth creation. So I enjoy that, and I enjoy the work I do in private equity.
Mm. Now, some of our listeners are much, much younger. They're starting out. And it's always the one question I always get, which is, what should I know, or how should I get started in business, etc. What advice would you offer to people who are actually early on in their careers and thinking about going into business?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, make sure you enjoy it. I'm not sure I always took that advice, and these jobs are stressful, and there's a lot of responsibility, and sometimes you can forget that actually it can be fun. And if you look as if you're enjoying it, people around you will find it easier to enjoy it as well. So always remember to enjoy it, and you'll be at your best anyway. I think particularly for entrepreneurs, and I've worked with a good few, I think it's right to be passionate and have a vision, and largely that's why people become entrepreneurs. But you must hold on to that vision for your ultimate goal, but then be very dispassionate about what you have to do in order to get there. And I think I often see businesses go wrong because they cling on passionately to individual elements of the business, where actually that can change time and time again. You can pivot and go in different directions and still stay true to a bigger vision.
No, so you probably know that I also chair of the Octopus Group, and I do a lot of work with early stage venture businesses. And I find it fascinating that the really successful entrepreneurs, the people who, as you quite rightly say, they've got an idea, they've got something they want to do, but then they pivot around that quite a lot in order to actually achieve it.
Yeah.
So the business may actually look very different from where it started out.
They can be remarkably, the successful ones, unemotional.
Yeah.
About almost any part of the business. They'll change almost any part of the business in order to achieve that ultimate success. And the other thing I'd say to an entrepreneur is allow compounding to do its work, and stay in longer and grow it bigger. And that's a challenge for the UK, that entrepreneurs sell out too early, or they give up too much of the.
Why do you think that's the case, Terry? Because I've observed the same thing. People are out, sort of want to get out after 5 years or something, but that often is way, way too early if a business is successful.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know why, but I've seen it, and it comes at a cost, and partly it's funding, and what funding is available if you wish to retain a significant interest. Partly entrepreneurs don't have a great experience of the listed markets, and it may be a clash there of, is the amount of compliance right for that type of business? It may also be cultural, that perhaps entrepreneurship is not celebrated as much as it should be within the UK, and people get tired. They get tired of the pressures, and they want to withdraw and do something else. But if they stayed in longer and just let the maths work, it can make a huge difference. And if you are on a settled strategy, let that strategy run. And the fruits of that can be so much larger.
I agree with that. So one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is to get people to actually understand, the importance of business and entrepreneurship in terms of creating value and creating growth. Could you just maybe explain your views on that?
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship is vital to the future success of the UK. Everybody agrees that you need a wealthy society in order to be able to meet the kind of social objectives that we have for health and education and these challenges of old age and so on and so forth. Get good infrastructure. All of that costs a lot of money, and that money has to come from somewhere. So the economy has to grow. In order to grow, you need successful enterprises. You need wealthy people. Not only actually to invest back into their business, but actually with an experienced eye, invest into other businesses, and in that way recycle their entrepreneurial know-how, and the money that they've made out of it. And I think that a little bit the UK is taking that a bit for granted. They've lost sight a bit of how important that is, and we have to encourage more people to take risk in organizations or in starting businesses, and we have to support them to do it. And the challenge we have at the moment is that well-meaning regulation probably has gone too far in society. If you look at the rate of growth of regulations, it outstripped the rate of growth of the economy. And we've probably got that balance wrong between, balancing the interests of the individual and what they're trying to do and the wider interests of society. And we need to reset that a little bit. And as I was saying earlier, accept that life and business is not risk-free. And maybe if we do have the odd spectacular failure, maybe we should live with that because it allows a faster rate of growth overall, and take these failures as part and parcel of enterprise and growth.
Do you have any insight into sort of why Britain has gone down this route of actually not celebrating entrepreneurs? It's almost the other way around. Business and entrepreneurship is often heavily criticised in the press, government, etc. Have you any sense of why that's happened?
No, I think that over time, there has become a distrust in markets. We all, can have a view as to why that is or what contributed to it. And a well-meaning but probably ultimately misguided attempts by government to intervene into those markets, into those decisions, and try to adjust and protect citizens and consumers. And I think that that's ultimately a mistake. That you've got to trust your citizens, trust consumers, and trust markets. That really people themselves know best about their lives and the decisions they want to make. Occasionally they'll make mistakes, but to some extent that's part of free will.
Yeah.
And allow people to make those mistakes and learn from it.
Yeah, it would be great if we could create a more positive and encouraging environment for business and entrepreneurship. I think that's absolutely right.
And of course, there is a place for regulation.
Of course.
It's not about throwing regulation out the window. You have to balance interests. You have to ensure that as far as you're able, that there are guidelines. But it's gone too far. I think that balance has been lost.
Yeah, I can see that. Very good. Well, thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John.
So I've just finished what I thought was a phenomenal conversation with Terry Leahy, and I think there were two things which came out of it which really resonated with me. The first thing is that here is a very successful chief executive who, in a time when most people have gone off into happy retirement, still has the dynamism and drive to help entrepreneurs make their businesses work, and to actually be the chairman of some very big private equity investments. Really phenomenal to see he's still got that drive and energy. And then the second thing, which I think you will have seen in all the answers, He has this amazing ability to make complicated into simple and to really distill down the things which really matter in any business situation.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is brought to you by the Institute of Directors and is produced by Econ Films. Head to iod.com to join our growing community and gain access to opportunities for development, networking, and business support. Join me next time, wherever you get your podcasts, as I ask business leaders the question, but tell me how. And remember, the views in this podcast are those of the speakers, not necessarily the IoD.